Hi. One of the most common questions that I get when I'm teaching people how to build effective remote relationships is, but what happens if I don't like to turn my camera on, or the person on the other end doesn't like to turn their camera on? Well, for ages, it took me a while to realize what the problem was. We all, or the majority of us at least, unless you're a complete introvert, spend our time talking to people face to face. We are quite used to people being able to see us when we're talking. So what's the problem? The problem is not that other people can see you, it's that you can see yourself. That's what's really the problem. And the example I give if I'm talking to people about this is, if you imagine that you and I were stood having a conversation face to face, but I was holding a mirror up beside me so that you could see yourself whilst you were talking, I can pretty much guarantee that you would very rapidly feel just as uncomfortable in that situation as a lot of people do on video calls. There's a very simple solution to that. Not every tool allows it, but my favorite one, Zoom, absolutely does, and that is to hide your self view. Now, let me be really clear. I am not talking about turning off your video feed, because otherwise the person on the other end can't see you. What I'm talking about is simply hiding the little window that shows what you look like yourself. So when you initially come onto the call, or you're joining the call, obviously make sure that you're well lit, that people can see you, all of the little checks just to make sure that you're looking professional on the call or on the video. But once you're actually on and you're happy with that on Zoom, you can hover over your own video feed. You'll see three little dots appear if you're on a laptop, and tap on those and it gives you an option to hide self view. If you want to know whether you can do it in the other platforms, then just Google, hide myself and the name of the platform, and there should be an FAQ on their site for doing that. But what that then means is other people can see you, but you can't see yourself, and you can concentrate on just having that conversation with people. The other part of that question that I get about what do I do if the person on the other end doesn't want to turn their camera on? And it's kind of a two-part answer to that. Firstly, that actually matters less for how they perceive you than you might think. By my estimation, I reckon you will get about 60 to 70% of the benefit, the increase in connection and rapport, even if you're the only one that turns your camera on. Because now people can see you, they get to know and like you, and they can see how you're coming across and all the body language and everything else. So there's that. If they won't turn their camera on, and obviously you can't see them, my usual response to that is, oh, come on, turn your camera on. I much prefer talking to living, breathing human beings. And the key to it, whatever phrasing you use, is to do it with good humor and good nature. And sometimes you'll get pushback and they'll say things like, oh, it's really messy, and some people, you'll never be able to convince them to turn the camera on. I think in today's environment, we're seeing more people being willing to, but there's some people that are still very reluctant. But a little bit of sort of gentle reminders and that sort of good-humored nature of, come on, you can see me. It doesn't matter if it's messy. Maybe show them, show your vulnerable side a little bit. Maybe show them the, kind of bit of the messiness if you've got something around you. But just persuading them is, as Dave, like a lot of things, it's down to rapport. People will be more willing to turn their camera on if they feel safe. And it is about safety. When I talk about being able to build high-performing teams, I regularly refer back to the Google research that was done. They spent 2 years looking into what makes a high-performing team, and they initially expected it to be the skills and having the right combination of people. And that ultimately was not what they found. What they found was it was down to how the team interacted, and they came up with 5 key attributes of high-performing teams. And the number one most important attribute, and if this isn't there, nothing else matters, is psychological safety. That's the feeling that you can be your whole self, you can be heard, you can take risks, you can express an opinion without fear of shame or ridicule, or being, somebody shooting the messenger. And having that video on really does help build that trust. And sometimes if they're not turning their camera on, it means because that trust isn't quite there yet. So turn yours on, demonstrate that it's safe. Because what I've found working with teams over the years is that over time, even those that are perhaps a little bit reluctant initially start to feel safe to be seen, and turn their cameras on. And I'm going to leave you with one final example of the difference it can make and why it is worth persisting and worth continually encouraging people to turn their cameras on and building that feeling of safety and trust. I was working with a development team who were based out in Minsk, and the lead developer out there initially not only wouldn't turn his camera on, but actually couldn't. He had a desktop machine and it didn't have a webcam. And I carried on sort of with this for a few weeks. And during the time that he didn't have his camera on, all I had was his voice. Now, for Central and Eastern European, and I have checked this with them, and they admit themselves that this is not uncommon because of the tonality of the language that they have to a sort of English or sort of Western ear. It can sound very flat and the person can come across as quite dour. Now, this guy, very, very capable, technically, absolutely no issue with him, and he wasn't unfriendly. It just sounded sounded a bit miserable, really, to be perfectly honest. Just quite flat and not really an awful lot of emotion to the voice. And eventually, after a few weeks, he relented. He actually put a requisition into the help desk, and they provided him with a webcam. And I will never forget the meeting that we had when he first turned his camera on. Because up to that point, my impression had been of a very capable, perfectly civil individual, but just kind of a bit flat. He turned his camera on and my perception changed instantly. Suddenly, I was presented with this really smiley, happy, very friendly face, and it totally changed for the better my impression of him. Not that I had a bad impression, but it just lifted it, and suddenly it was like, oh my God, this guy's actually really fun. But that was shown in all of his facial expressions. It didn't come across in the voice. So it is worth persisting. So if you don't want to turn your camera on, hide your self view, because for most people that's what makes them uncomfortable. If the person on the other end won't turn it on, it's generally a trust issue, sometimes an environmental issue, and you can either say to them, don't worry about it so much, particularly in the current environment. We've seen TV presenters and health ministers and all sorts of people, suddenly the kids turn up in the background. It happens. We're real, live, living, breathing human beings. Those are the questions that I get the most, but there's lots more. And if I can help you, Gordon Mullen, Effective Remote Relationships, and I'll see you next time.